From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. A stolen idea for a novel, an angry social media post, and an online backlash that engulfs the main characters. These are the elements of an intriguing new novel by Colorado author R.L. Mazes. The writer says it draws on some of her own experiences. And the novel raises thorny questions about who gets to own an idea, who gets to tell a particular story, and the tension of writing a novel in an age of viral posts and social media tirades. The novel is called A Complete Fiction. It was released in November. Writer R.L. Mazes, who lives near Boulder, joined me then to talk about it. We're listening back to that conversation today.
The story was really inspired by my being aware of social media, aware of Twitter, taking time on Twitter, too much time, and seeing a lot of writers getting flamed by people who may not have read their book or may have read a little blurb or may have read a review, but not the whole book.
Right.
And then also by people who had read none of it and just repeated. Right? Because that's what we do on social media when we're mad.
Oh, yeah.
We just reshare things, whether they're true or not. So I saw that happening to writers, and my heart really hurt. I know what it takes to write a book. And when I saw those writers and their books, for lack of a better word, canceled, it really bothered me.
Well, your new book is called A Complete Fiction. It revolves around two aspiring authors who are working very hard to get their novels published. Could you just give us a quick synopsis of what happens?
The book is about a writer who goes on social media to accuse an editor of stealing the novel she submitted to him for publication, and who is then herself accused of revealing her sister's secrets in the book.
I mean, this story kind of sounds like a writer's nightmare. Editors stealing book ideas, family members saying, "Don't talk about me." How common are these issues for people who write novels?
They're super common. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of editors stealing writers' work, and I don't think up-and-coming writers should worry about that. I don't think that should be the concern. But on the other hand, I do think writers worry about telling other people's stories because we're inspired all the time by all kinds of things. And they move us or they bother us, and we want to put them in novels. And we're concerned that, do we have a right to tell the story, for one? What if we really disguise it? Does that give us the right, or just take it as inspiration, honestly, so that we're not really telling anyone else's story. We were inspired by someone else's story, and then we wrote a whole new story based on that.
One of your two main characters, PJ, is a struggling writer. She supports herself by driving for a rideshare company. She's a dogged environmentalist who maybe borders on smug about that sometimes. And she makes choices that are problematic. What draws you as a writer to want to create flawed characters that, you still want your readers to sympathize with?
I always want my books to be about growth. And you can't have growth unless you start from a point where you need to grow, right? Where you have some character flaws. I don't believe in writing perfect characters or perfect villains for that matter either. Usually I try to write what I think of as round characters or complex characters, who have traits we both admire and like, and also traits that we hate to see in someone else and maybe hate to recognize in our own personalities.
There's a passage that comes earlier in the book that really stuck with me. PJ has just signed a pretty significant book deal for a novel that is a fictionalized retelling of an assault that happened to her sister, Mia. There's a moment where Mia pleads with PJ to not publish it. PJ considers whether to move forward. Would you read that excerpt for us?
Sure. PJ considered calling her agent and canceling the deal. She wondered what it would feel like to choose her sister's peace of mind over her own dreams. Probably good for a minute, and then bad for the rest of her life, once she realized she'd missed her opportunity to be published and would drive for a ride with me until someone took the keys away when she was 90.
In your book, you explore the idea of who gets to tell a particular story, and it's tangled. I understand, PJ, who is desperately hanging on to her dream of selling her book, but I also empathize with her sister who could be harmed by this book. As a writer, where do you come down on this question of who gets to tell a story about a traumatic event?
Yeah, for one thing, I think it's contextual, right? I don't think you can have one rule for every event. It's going to matter how much the writer disguises the story or really changes it and only uses whatever happened as an inspiration. But the other thing is, memoir would be very different, right? Nonfiction would be very different than fiction. I would have a much harder and fast rule that you can't hurt someone in that way in nonfiction than I do in fiction, simply because, again, as fiction writers, we have the liberty to totally change something so that we get at the heart of the matter, but we're not exposing anyone.
Right. And it is something to keep in mind, too. It's like, who is going to be harmed, but who might be helped by hearing a story?
Absolutely. I thank you so much for saying that. Sometimes in this debate, we sometimes forget that it's a writer's job to tell stories. That's our mission. It's a writer's job to tell stories that have meaning. And those stories are going to help a lot of people, especially people who may have experienced something similar to what we're telling. So I think the tension is between not harming someone to whom it actually happened and maybe where you saw the story, and at the same time being true to your job as a writer and telling stories that help other people.
The book explores the challenges of being a writer in our very online society. A writer almost has to be on some kind of social media, maybe all the platforms, but this is a space that's filled with hot takes and cancel culture. As an author yourself, what do you think is the impact of this on art and the creative process?
Yeah, it makes writers, I'm sure other artists as well, hesitant to tell stories. And I think that's really a bad thing. If you're thinking to yourself, oh, wow, someone's not going to like this, and therefore you don't tell a story, then the world is robbed of those stories. And we all need stories. Human beings live, on stories. We tell them ourselves. Non-writers tell stories all the time. You tell stories all the time.
Sure.
And so I think, to the extent that it makes writers censor themselves, it's really not a good thing. To the extent that it makes writers somewhat careful of not hurting people, that could be a good thing. So it's really complicated.
That's Colorado author R.L. Mazes talking about her latest novel, A Complete Fiction, which was just published in November. We'll have links where you can learn more in our show notes and at KUNC.org. And you can hear more In The NoCo author interviews. Find them for free in our feed on your favorite podcast platform or at our website. Again, that's KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.